Now, there have been widespread protests in Turkey after police arrested the mayor of Istanbul just days before he was to be nominated as a presidential candidate. Authorities said Ekrem Imamoglu was detained as part of an investigation into alleged corruption and terror links. But the opposition says his arrest is aimed at stopping him from challenging President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's grip on power. Our correspondent Julia Hahn has more.
The government must resign. These people are shouting. Despite barricades and a protest ban, they gathered outside Istanbul's main police station in support of Ekrem Imamoglu, the city's mayor who was detained Wednesday morning on charges including corruption and aiding a terrorist group. Before being taken from his home by police, Imamoglu posted this video on his social media.
Hundreds of police officers have arrived at my door. We are facing great tyranny, but I want you to know that I will not be discouraged. I love you all very much. I entrust myself to my nation.
Ekrem Imamoglu is a powerful figure within Turkey's opposition, and he is widely seen as the strongest challenger to longtime President Erdogan. His detention comes just a few days before he was to be named his party's candidate for the 2028 presidential election. Imamoglu has served as Istanbul's mayor for nearly 6 years now, running Turkey's largest city of some 16 million people. Residents told us they are shocked and angry about their mayor's detention.
Ekrem Imamoglu was an opposition candidate with the highest potential. Now they are trying to neutralize him politically.
This is very sad for democracy in our country. We're sad as a society. Our country really deserves democracy.
I'm absolutely furious. When I woke up this morning, I woke up with sadness. The rule of law has to be respected.
A statement from the Istanbul Public Prosecutor's Office cited charges including bribery and extortion, saying that Imamoglu was the leader of a criminal organization and that a total of 100 suspects had been rounded up. The Turkish Justice Minister later confirmed a separate probe for allegedly aiding a terrorist organization. He insisted the judiciary operated independently, while Imamoglu's opposition party, the CHP, slammed the mayor's detention as, quote, a coup. Shortly after the police raid of Imamoglu's home, access to social media platforms was restricted. And the Istanbul governor's office immediately issued a ban on all protests for 4 days. Hundreds of police surrounded City Hall and closed off streets in central Istanbul in an attempt to prevent larger demonstrations. Imamoglu's detention occurred just hours after Istanbul University revoked his bachelor's degree amid claims it was falsely obtained. In Turkey, a candidate without a university degree can't run for the presidency. Imamoglu's career has been overshadowed by a string of what critics say are politically motivated legal cases against him in recent years. His detention could put an end to his presidential ambitions and cost Imamoglu the Istanbul mayor's seat. It also fuels fears that President Erdogan has marked a new phase in his crackdown on dissenting voices.
I'm joined now by Karol Wasilewski, who's head of the Turkey department at the Centre for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. Thanks so much for your time, for joining us on the programme. How big of a moment is this in Turkish politics?
Well, it's a make or break moment, I would say. Ekrem Imamoglu, as it was said in the material, was supposed to be the biggest challenger to Tayyip Erdogan. Maybe not when we look at the data, because what surveys show is that Mansur Yavaş may have even bigger chances towards Tayyip Erdogan. But first of all, when it comes to Ekrem Imamoglu's political career, which kind of reminds the career of Tayyip Erdogan. Secondly, a political charisma and his ability to mobilize really masses of people. So in this sense, this is a make up or break point, yeah, when we will also have probably definite answer to the question we as political analysts and sometimes scientists have been asking for quite some time. What is actually the state of regime in Turkey? You know, we have had these various discussions between, let's say, illiberal democracy or competitive authoritarianism. this is the moment we will probably get our answer.
Is it still possible that Imamoglu could still become a presidential candidate for the opposition?
You know, it's highly unlikely, but in Turkey, everything is possible. So there are two things I would like to say. The first thing is that, as you probably remember, Ekrem Imamoglu doesn't have an easy political life. So once he became the mayor of Istanbul, elections became cancelled. And the Turkish society didn't like it. In renewed elections, he had a massive support from the electorate. This is the first thing. Secondly, although I believe it is highly unlikely, because it seems that the direction is, well, quite well known. It seems probable that if there is a massive, but I have to underline it, massive, really massive support for Ekrem Imamoglu, if opposition uses the card that Tayyip Erdogan uses very often, the national will, then maybe there is a chance. Although I have to be pessimistic and tell you that I find this highly unlikely.
Opposition leaders have labelled his detention a coup attempt. Would you say that that is an accurate description?
I don't know whether this is accurate description because we are using political metaphors, yeah? But without using political metaphors, we may say that this is, well, I'm sorry, I have to repeat myself. We will have our answer on whether Turkey is still democratic, or is it a kind of authoritarian, competitive authoritarian country? So this is definitely a move that is anti-democratic, and without labeling it coup or anti-coup or something else, you know, it goes without saying that this move is absolutely anti-democratic.
And what are the chances now of the current protests, because people have been taking to the streets, what are the chances of those protests escalating, despite the fact that the government has restricted social media and, as we heard in our report, it has actually banned demonstrations in Istanbul?
Okay, so first of all, as I told you before, the only chance of success is massive demonstrations. But I guess that this won't be enough, that Turkey would need a kind of civil disobedience procedure if it wants to, well, if people want to succeed when it comes to Ekrem Imamoglu. That's the first thing. Secondly, we tend to forget it because Turkey has been a country which domestic politics has been, I would say, normalized in the last 2 years. But we tend to forget that there are lots of people who believe, still remember the atmosphere post-2016, the atmosphere after the failed coup of 2016. So even when I speak to my friends in Turkey, lots of them say that lots of people are still afraid of crossing the line when protesting. So this is something that forces me to think that the protests will be probably limited. Although, again, I have to repeat this line that this is Turkey and everything is possible in Turkish politics. And even though we have repeatedly complained about the state of Turkish democracy, even though we have repeatedly argued that Turkish regime is becoming more and more authoritarian, there are some signs that Turkish democracy is still alive. The signs I mentioned, like, for example, society's reaction to this annulment of elections, when Imamoglu stood against Binali Yıldırım, and in the renewed elections won in a massive number of votes.
All right, Karol Wasilewski from the Centre for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. Karol, thank you for your time. We'll have to leave it there.
So let's get some insights here from Asli Aydıntaşbaş, a journalist and a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution. First of all, can you just put into perspective for us how significant of a moment this is in Turkish politics?
This is a very significant moment. It's a day that will live in infamy because even though Turkey had been lurching in an illiberal direction, well documented and well known for the European public, it still was a country where competitive electoral politics mattered. In fact, Imamoglu had won Istanbul 3 times in an election campaign in which he practically ran against President Erdogan, which is why he was increasingly seen as a de facto leader of the opposition bloc and the primary candidate to run against Erdogan in upcoming elections, whenever they may be. The elections are scheduled until in 2028, but most likely there will be some type of early elections in Turkey. So disqualifying his main competitor is telling us that President Erdogan is switching, transitioning to a different model of governance, and that's very worrisome.
And is it a full disqualification with the invalidation of his diploma and his arrest, or is it possible that he could still become the presidential candidate for the opposition?
I think it looks increasingly difficult for him to legally be the candidate. His diploma from 31 years ago is now annulled. That was what happened yesterday. And, that means he cannot be the president of Turkey. And today he is detained. People are gathering in Istanbul in circumstances that look very much like a lockdown, with a number of subway stations closed. I think the government does not want a mass pouring or protests, and we'll see what will happen. Turks are very cautious when it comes to protesting on the streets. They understand that the climate is very different from what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think we're unlikely to see the types of scenes we've seen in Serbia. It's more likely to be the sort of more controlled and smaller protests we've seen in Iran or in Russia over the past couple of years. But this is a shock, even for a system, a country which had been going in a liberal direction, because CHP, the main opposition party, is seen as a legitimate opposition voice. And the truth is that in 2024 local elections, they swept across the country, winning nearly all big cities and municipalities. So it's effectively removing your competitor.
So if you don't think we are all that likely to see these major protests occurring, where does this leave CHP? How might we see continued forms of opposition within Turkey?
It's very important. They will have to think hard and find a strategy that works, a strategy that is good for a permissive liberal environment may not be the best strategy for an environment where there's greater restrictions or more illiberal climate. So I think that it might be that they go back to a fallback candidate. It might be that they put to sleep for now the sort of election calls for early election. But one thing they will do symbolically is to go ahead and elect Ekrem Imamoglu, Istanbul mayor, as their presidential candidate in sort of early internal party apparatus. That's something they're likely to do tomorrow or later this week. Even though it may be annulled by authorities, I think they'll want to have that symbolic gesture and come out and say, he is our primary candidate.
And we do see here just some live footage of people who have decided to take to the streets protesting their discontent. I want to thank Asli Aydıntaşbaş for speaking with us on DW News. She's a journalist and visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution.